All right, let's dive deep into the history of the United Farm Workers Union. Buckle up, because we're going to unpack a story full of twists and turns.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
And to guide us through it all, we've got this awesome Wondery podcast episode all about the UFW.
It really digs deep.
So get ready for hunger strikes, political maneuvering, and get this, even a connection to like some crazy group therapy method.
It's fascinating stuff. And it's so important to understand labor movements.
Especially today,
Right,
right?
absolutely. Especially with all these debates about workers' rights. The UFW story is like a powerful lens into these struggles. And then you have Cesar Chavez, this captivating yet flawed figure leading the charge.
Yeah, he's such an interesting character. Okay, so let's rewind to 1970.
Okay.
The UFW was riding high after that landmark Great Boycott victory. They had contracts, membership was booming. And Chavez, well, he's got this vision for a place called La Paz.
It was meant to be like a hub for the UFW, a place where they could, educate, strategize, and really connect with the soul of the movement. But as we learned from the podcast, La Paz kind of became this point of contention.
Oh, really?
Yeah, some folks, they saw it as Chavez isolating himself from the people he was supposed to be representing, the everyday workers.
Interesting. So even at their peak, there were already these underlying tensions.
Right.
The podcast actually mentions Larry Itlong, a key Filipino organizer. He was like instrumental in those early victories.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was critical.
It sounds like his departure from the UFW in 1971 was a sign of things to come.
Yeah, it really highlights the complexities of Chavez's leadership. Even with these huge wins, he was struggling to maintain unity within this diverse coalition of workers. And that tension, it just seems to escalate as Chavez tries to expand the UFW beyond California.
Which takes us to 1972. Ambitious expansion plans. Huge pushback.
Big time.
The UFW was targeting states like Arizona, Texas, Florida, but they hit a wall, especially in Arizona, where they passed legislation to make unionization almost impossible for farm workers.
Yeah, they weren't messing around. And Chavez, being Chavez, he went for a dramatic, symbolic gesture, a hunger strike.
Hunger strike to protest the Arizona law.
Wow. It wasn't his first hunger strike, but this one, according to the podcast, really took a toll on him.
The podcast describes Chavez sweating it out in this Phoenix community center, his health declining.
Yeah, it was bad.
It was so bad, they brought in Dr. King's personal physician to monitor him.
Yeah.
And he was urging Chavez to stop.
Yeah.
What makes someone push themselves to that limit?
Well, Chavez, he was deeply committed to La Causa. He said, I'll gladly give my life for La Causa. And, figures like Dolores Huerta mirrored that dedication. Her rally cry, Si se puede, became the anthem of the movement.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
But even with all that, the Arizona law stayed. It's like this microcosm of the challenges they faced, this incredible dedication, but they couldn't get the outcome they wanted.
Makes you wonder, did Chavez miscalculate? Did he underestimate the opposition? Or did the hunger strike achieve other goals, even if it didn't overturn the law? We need to consider all these nuances when we look at his leadership.
So you have these internal tensions simmering, this external pushback, and the constant financial strain of fighting on multiple fronts.
Right.
And then in 73, just as the UFW's contracts with the California grape growers were set to expire, a new threat pops up. The Teamsters.
Yeah, the Teamsters, with all their resources and connections, they started undercutting the UFW, signing contracts with growers that were previously aligned with Chavez.
Oh, man. That's a problem.
Big problem. Created a huge dilemma for the UFW.
It was a perfect storm. They were already stretched thin, and now they've got this powerful rival union to deal with. What did they do?
Well, the AFL-CIO, the UFW's parent union, they saw what was happening and offered Chavez a deal, $1.6 million. A lot of money back then. But in exchange, he had to focus on statewide legislative battles, not those individual farm-level campaigns.
Okay, so on the surface, it sounds like a lifeline, but I'm guessing it wasn't that simple.
No, not at all. Chavez was all about grassroots organizing, direct action.
Right.
He was really worried about getting bogged down in what he saw as the bureaucracy of legislative battles. He didn't want to lose the UFW's momentum.
But they needed the money. What was he supposed to do?
In the end, he accepted the deal, but it felt like a turning point. It wasn't just about the money. It was about a shift in approach, maybe even a shift in Chavez himself.
And this brings us to the 1973 UFW convention. Chavez makes some big moves to consolidate his power. Rewrote the union's constitution, expanded membership beyond farm workers, changed how dues were collected. It seems like he was becoming more and more isolated, even from longtime supporters.
Well, remember, there were a lot of forces working against him. The FBI was watching him, there had been bombings, growers were actively trying to undermine the UFW. So yeah, there was paranoia, but it wasn't completely out of nowhere.
True, but it definitely started to seep into his leadership.
Yeah.
Which leads us to, I think, one of the most bizarre chapters in the UFW story, the game.
Yeah, the game. It was this controversial group therapy thing that Chavez got fixated on after meeting Charles Dedrick, the founder of Synanon. It was an addiction treatment center known for being very, very aggressive, confrontational.
So, brutal honesty, tearing down defenses, forcing people to confront their deepest insecurities.
The idea, I guess, was to build trust and openness.
Okay.
But in the UFW, which was already so tense and paranoid, it became something much darker.
It became a way to silence dissent. Anyone who questioned Chavez was subjected to this intense psychological pressure.
It's a tragic irony. Chavez, who started as a voice for the voiceless, ended up suppressing those who questioned him. And this was all happening as the UFW was dealing with financial pressures, the Teamsters threat. Things were unraveling.
And then comes maybe Chavez's most controversial decision, a move that really hurt his reputation.
You're talking about the 1977 visit to the Philippines, right?
Yeah, he went to the Philippines as a guest of President Marcos, a dictator who was known for being incredibly brutal. It seems so out of character. Here's this champion of workers' rights aligning himself with an authoritarian regime. What was he thinking?
It was a baffling decision. It felt like it contradicted everything Chavez stood for. And the UFW, they desperately needed to regain their moral high ground at that point.
So you've got internal dissent, external criticism, financial troubles, and now this Marcos thing. How did Chavez respond to all of that?
He doubled down, he pushed the game even harder, got rid of more dissenters. It seemed like he was retreating further into his own world, a far cry from the idealistic leader who had inspired so many.
And all of this is happening right as conservatism is sweeping through America. Reagan gets elected. Anti-union sentiment is on the rise. It's the perfect storm.
It really is. It shows that even the most powerful movements are vulnerable to both internal and external pressures. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, the UFW was about to be tested like never before.
It really is like watching a tragedy unfold. You have this champion of the people taking on these huge adversaries, and yet it's like some of the worst damage is coming from inside the movement itself. Do you think if those internal struggles hadn't happened, if they hadn't blown up, could the UFW have survived those external challenges?
It's a tough question. Could they have adapted to the changing political landscape of the 80s, the whole anti-union wave, if they hadn't been so fractured? I mean, it's impossible to say for sure, but it's clear those internal conflicts made them really vulnerable.
And as all of this is happening, the media starts shining a light on some serious financial problems within the UFW, accusations of misusing grants, not paying taxes. It was a mess.
Oh, yeah. And then you have that 60 Minutes interview with Gilbert Padilla in '83. That really brought those issues to the forefront.
Right.
And, Padilla, he was one of Chavez's closest allies. He had been there from the very beginning.
Right.
When he went public with his concerns, it was a huge blow.
He didn't hold back at all. It was like he was confirming everything people had been whispering about Chavez and the UFW for years. This picture of an organization that had lost its way, a leader who was more focused on holding on to power than on actually helping farm workers.
It was devastating for Chavez's credibility. And it happened right when the UFW was already struggling to adapt to this whole new political reality. Reagan was in the White House, anti-union sentiment was growing, and the UFW was becoming more and more isolated.
So internal turmoil, external pressure, and now this very public scandal. How do you even begin to deal with all of that? What did Chavez do?
Well, he kind of retreated back into familiar territory. In '86, he launches the Wrath of Grapes boycott. But this time, he shifted the focus from traditional labor issues like wages and working conditions to pesticide use.
Oh, interesting.
It was a smart move, really. It appealed to a much wider audience by tapping into this growing concern about food safety and the environment.
So he's connecting the struggle of farm workers to the health of consumers.
Mm-hmm.
It's brilliant. But did it actually work?
Not really. I mean, it got a lot of media attention, raised awareness about pesticides, but it didn't really gain enough traction to force any big changes in the industry. And this leads to Chavez's kind of his final act of defiance. Another hunger strike in '88, again focused on pesticides.
This one was even more extreme than the last. 36 days. I mean, just imagine the toll that takes on your body and mind, especially when you consider Chavez was, what, in his 60s by then, carrying the weight of all these other struggles. What do you think pushed him to that point?
Well, I think it shows his incredible commitment, but it also maybe reveals a certain stubbornness, a refusal to back down even when things were clearly stacked against him. He had been exposed to pesticides himself while he was working in the fields, and he really truly believed they were a danger to workers and consumers. It was personal for him.
He's putting his body on the line, bringing national attention to this issue, but it doesn't lead to any concrete wins for the UFW. It's almost like a Greek tragedy, this hero fighting for this worthy cause, but undone by his own flaws and the forces arrayed against him.
And it's in this context in 1993 that Chavez dies peacefully in his sleep. This man who had carried the weight of so much struggle, so much hope, so much disappointment.
It's such a complicated legacy. This iconic figure who gave a voice to the voiceless, inspired generations of activists, but also a leader who made decisions, especially in those later years, that really tarnished his image and contributed to the decline of the movement that he built.
Yeah, people still debate his legacy today. Historians, activists, they all weigh in. You can't deny what he accomplished. He made life better for countless farm workers, helped bring about real labor reform, focused national attention on the struggles of this marginalized, exploited community.
His picture's on stamps, schools are named after him,
Mhm.
his birthday is a holiday in several states. He's an American icon.
Yeah.
But those later years, the paranoia, the infighting, that Marcos trip, they cast a long shadow.
And what's really striking is that the UFW today, it's just a shadow of its former self. And farm workers are still fighting for many of the same rights that Chavez fought for all those years ago. It makes you think about the long-term impact of his leadership and the choices he made.
It's both inspiring and heartbreaking, you know. It reminds us that change takes time, it's a process, and even the most charismatic leaders can make mistakes. So what do you think? Was he a hero? A flawed leader? Both.
That's what's so interesting about history, right? There are no simple answers. It's about understanding the complexity, the nuance and contradictions that make up a life, a movement. And it's about learning from both the triumphs and the failures of those who came before us.
We've covered a lot in this deep dive. From the highs of that great boycott victory to the lows of the internal struggles and the financial scandals. It's been quite a ride.
We've only just scratched the surface, though. There's so much more to explore about Chavez, the UFW, and the fight for workers' rights. But before we wrap up, I want to talk about something that really stood out to me while I was researching this. The UFW's emphasis on grassroots organizing, their deep connection to the communities they serve.
Oh, that's a great point. Even when they were in decline, the UFW never abandoned those core principles. They still rely on boycotts, strikes, community engagement to fight for farm workers. Makes you wonder, what would Chavez think about the state of the UFW today? Would he see it as carry on his vision or a betrayal of his ideals?
It's an interesting question, but one thing is for sure, his legacy lives on, not just in the UFW, but in so many other organizations and individuals fighting for social and economic justice.
Like the fight for $15, the growing support for unions among young people, the focus on workplace safety and economic inequality. They might not all be directly connected to the UFW, but they all carry echoes of Chavez's fight, his spirit of resistance, his belief in the power of collective action. It's like he planted these seeds, and even though the original plant might have faded, those seeds have spread and taken root in all these new and unexpected ways.
It's a powerful image, and it's one that gives me hope. It tells me that this fight for justice, for dignity, for a better world, it's something that's bigger than any one person or organization.
It's something we can all be a part of. And maybe that's Chavez's most enduring legacy, that reminder that even when things seem impossible, we can still make a difference. We can stand up for what we believe in, fight for those who are marginalized and exploited, and work towards a future where everyone has the opportunity to live with dignity and respect. It's pretty amazing to think about how, even though the UFW isn't what it used to be, the seeds of change Chavez planted, they're still blooming in these new movements. As we kind of wrap up our look at his life, his legacy, what do you think stands out to you as the most significant part of Chavez's story?
For me, it's that reminder that movements are made of people with their hopes and dreams, their frustrations and their flaws. And those human elements, they can either drive a movement or they can be what tears it apart. And Chavez's story really, really embodies that tension.
It's so true. I mean, his his intensity, that unwavering belief in La Causa, it was such a powerful driving force. But, that same single-mindedness might have also kept him from being flexible, being willing to compromise. Could things have been different if he had been more open to collaboration, less suspicious of people who disagreed with him?
It's a question that I think about a lot. It really highlights those challenges of leadership, especially in social movements. How do you maintain that clear vision and sense of urgency, but also create space for people to dissent, to disagree, and how do you adapt to changing circumstances? It's not easy to find that balance.
Yeah, it seems like finding that balance is key to building a movement that lasts, one that can survive the internal conflicts and the external pressures.
Absolutely. It's not enough just to have a just cause. You have to build a culture of trust, transparency, accountability. You need to let people voice their concerns, let them contribute their skills, and you have to be willing to change your strategy when the situation calls for it.
So, for anyone listening who wants to make a difference in the world, what can we take away from Chavez's story, the good and the bad?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is the power of grassroots organizing. Chavez understood that real change comes from the ground up, empowering people to take action together. He built the UFW by going straight to the workers, hearing them out, and building trust through those shared struggles.
It's a powerful reminder that we don't have to wait for someone to give us permission. We
Yeah.
don't have to rely on these big institutions to make a difference. We can start where we are with the people around us and build those movements for change ourselves.
And another thing, don't forget the importance of perseverance. Chavez faced so many obstacles: poverty, discrimination, powerful enemies, even people in his own movement turned on him. But
Yeah.
but he never gave up on his vision. He reminds us that fighting for social justice, it's a marathon. You're going to have setbacks, you're going to be disappointed, but you have to keep going.
And sometimes those steps forward might mean questioning yourself,
Yeah.
being open to new ideas, even admitting when you've made a mistake. It's not always fun, but it's how we grow as individuals and as movements. So as we finish up this deep dive, what's one final thought you want to leave with our listeners?
I think it's this. Cesar Chavez's story, it's inspiring, it's a warning, and it shows us that even the most powerful leaders are just human. They can do incredible things, but they can also make mistakes. The key is to learn from those mistakes, hold ourselves and our leaders accountable, and never lose sight of the principles that guide our actions. The fight for a just world, it goes on, and it's up to all of us to keep carrying that torch.
Well said. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the life and legacy of Cesar Chavez.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting the good fight.